I received a question in response to the last video I made on generic intervals, and the question was, is it called an eighth if you were going from a C to a C, for example, and also asked, is the highest you can go a seventh? So if you watch that last video, you'll see I do intervals from a second all the way up to a seventh, so I can understand why you can have that question. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining generic intervals, eighths, and beyond. So in this video, what you will learn, I'm going to give a brief review of generic intervals, explain eighths and beyond, why it's important, and what's next. So just a brief review. The generic intervals are based on the musical alphabet, which has 7 letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and that is a repeating pattern. So after G, it starts over with A again, B, C, D, E, etc. And to find any generic interval, you're going to count the letters in the musical alphabet, starting from your starting letter and going to your ending letter, and you include all those as you're counting. So for example, the interval of a second, C to D would be an example of a second, 1, 2. Here's an example of a third, F to A, 1, 2, 3 letters. Here's an example of a fifth, say A to E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters. So A to E would be a fifth. And the other example I gave was a seventh, okay? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So D to C would be a seventh. So what happens if you are going more than 7? Well, first I'd like to go back, and if you're going from a D to the same D, or from any letter to the same letter itself, that's called a first. Or in music we call it a unison. Okay? It comes from the Latin uni, meaning one, and son from sonus, so one sound. Okay? So that's a unison. But if you're doing 8 notes, let's say from this C all the way up to this C, that would be called an eighth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, eighth. But in music we call it an octave. That also comes from the Latin octa, which means 8. And I'm not really sure why we call unisons unisons and octaves octaves rather than calling them firsts and eighths. So if you have some insight on why that is, let me know. I'm curious to find out too. But this is just the traditional way of referring to the octave and the unison. So this is the example she had asked about. If you go from a C up to a C, that is an octave, an eighth. And you can go beyond that. So for example, you can do a ninth. This is a ninth starting on a G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So from G all the way up to this A would be a ninth. Okay? Let's keep going. Running out of space here. Let's start here at the bottom of my graph with an E. If you go from E all the way up to this G here, that's 10 letters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So this E all the way up to just G would be a tenth. Another example for you. Say we go from E to A. That would be an 11th. Or E to B would be a 12th. And E to C, way up here, would be a 13th. Okay? Now, why is this information helpful? Well, like I explained in the previous video, just knowing these relationships gives you a ballpark understanding of where one note is compared to another, like how high or how much lower it is. But it just gets you in the ballpark Here's my picture of a ballpark. So generally speaking, you know that a third is a much smaller distance than a 13th, right? A much smaller leap. So you're in the general ballpark. But in the future, this will help you to figure out more complex intervals and chords. So if you've done any study on jazz music, for example, or interesting guitar chords, you'll see some crazy things that are like, what is that? For example, D7 flat 9 sharp 11 flat 13 chord or something like that. So you can look at that and be like, okay, I can figure out what the seventh note above a D would be, what the ninth note above a D would be, what an 11th would be, what the 13th would be. And so at least you'll have a ballpark figure for knowing what letters would be in that chord. So you'd have a D, obviously, a C, an E, some kind of a G, and some kind of a B. Okay, so uh, don't worry about that right now, but eventually it will help you figuring out these taller chords if you're able to go beyond just the octave. So, just as a review, to find the generic interval, count the letters in the musical alphabet starting from your starting letter, including that one, and then go all the way up to the last letter that you are ending on. And I say going up, you can go up or down really because it's the same amount of distance. Just count all the letters from your starting to your finish. That is your generic interval, that number. So I hope this is helpful. There are more resources in the description. I'll put a reference to the video that I'm talking about where I just give the basics of generic intervals and also some other videos on the elements, the 4 elements of music theory. Like this one is the introductory video. I believe there's 4 core elements. If you just master these basics, everything else will be easier to understand. You'll be able to put it together and understand better. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure you like, subscribe, leave comments, and I appreciate your questions. My name is Joseph E. Reed, musician, performer, and educator, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.